Hello and welcome to this month's edition of the Esri Law Enforcement Webinar Series. My name is Chris Delaney. I'm the Law Enforcement Technical Lead at Esri. And this month we'll be talking about some new tools that have been released in the June release of the new Crime Analysis Solution for ArcGIS Pro that will allow you to be able to conduct cell phone analysis. So thank you for joining us today. I want to talk just really quickly through the things that we'll be covering in today's webinar. First, for those of you who are not familiar with it, we're going to be covering a little bit about the Crime Analysis Solution, which is a free add-in for ArcGIS Pro. That's where these new cell phone analysis tools are located. Then we'll talk specifically about the new tools and the workflows that they support around analysis of cell phone and call detail record data. From there, we'll spend a little bit of time going through some demonstrations of what the outputs of the various tools are and how they work. We'll save some time for how you can get started with those tools, and then we'll reserve a little bit of time at the end for your questions. So jumping right into our presentation today, the first place I want to start is around the Crime Analysis Solution for ArcGIS Pro. Many of you who are working in the crime or the intelligence analysis world and are current users of ArcGIS Pro have already downloaded this free add-in for ArcGIS Pro. We've had over 1,000 downloads in our first year, which is fantastic. For those of you who are not familiar with the Crime Analysis Solution, it's a free add-in for ArcGIS Pro. When you download it, install it onto your computer, you're going to get a brand new ribbon in your ArcGIS Pro interface, and that ribbon is going to include not only existing out-of-the-box tools that analysts often use, but also some brand new tools that we've built custom to support specific desktop GIS needs that crime and intelligence analysts have. And we've organized all those tools in that one single ribbon according to the crime analysis process, or if you're an intel analyst, according to the intelligence cycle. So you can see you've got tools around getting your data onto the map and enhancing the attribute data in your layers, cleaning up data, organizing it. We've got some tools to support also the automation of geocoding and publishing that data into an ArcGIS Enterprise or ArcGIS Online layer. We also have tools that support selections and tools to support tactical and strategic point pattern analysis. So a variety of different hotspot analysis kinds of capabilities. And at this most recent release, the inclusion of our repeat and near repeat tools that enable you to do some crime predictions based on repeat and near repeat victimization methodology. The next section is around investigative analysis, so tools to help support a variety of mapping and spatial analysis capabilities around in support of investigations. Now, that's what we'll be talking about today, the new set of tools specifically for cell phone analysis. And then once you've done your analysis, the ability to create and share your work as some kind of information product, whether that's a hard copy map layout or whether that is pushing your data into a ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise portal to create a story map or a dashboard or some other kind of interactive mapping product. So this crime analysis solution, as I mentioned, is free. It's only available for ArcGIS Pro, and we've built this crime analysis solution for a couple of main reasons. First, to help those of you who are making the transition from ArcMap to its successor, ArcGIS Pro, make that change a little bit easier for you. ArcGIS Pro is a slightly different look and feel compared to ArcMap, and we want to make it as easy as possible for you to be able to make that change. A couple of things that are important to know if you have not made the jump to ArcGIS Pro. First and foremost, if you already are on maintenance with your ArcGIS desktop license that gets you ArcMap, you already have access to ArcGIS Pro. If you are not the administrator of your Esri licenses in your agency, you need to see them, and they will be able to go to a licensing portal that they have access to through Esri that will enable them to get an installer for ArcGIS Pro and download a license for ArcGIS Pro. So long story short there is if you have a existing license for ArcMap and you're on your maintenance, or you're part of an enterprise license agreement with Esri, you already have ArcGIS Pro. It's not going to cost you any additional money to get ArcGIS Pro. We're making the change from ArcMap to ArcGIS Pro because ArcMap is a 32-bit application. It's been around for 20 years. It it only runs one thing at a time. It has a tendency to crash when it's doing certain kinds of operations. It's a legacy application, and we needed to modernize desktop GIS to make it easier to use, to make it more responsive, and to be able to take advantage of modern tools, modern computing capabilities. And so that's what ArcGIS Pro represents. It's the modern version of ArcMap. And it also is great at connecting to WebGIS, whether that's ArcGIS Online or your ArcGIS Enterprise portal on your premise. It works with any data that is in those portals as if it's local on your desktop. So super smooth and easy to use with WebGIS. It's a great experience, but if you work in a completely disconnected environment or you don't have access to an ArcGIS Enterprise or an ArcGIS Online portal, don't worry. ArcGIS Pro works the exact same way that ArcMap works, and it can live entirely in disconnected environments. And we have lots of customers who do that, that are working with ArcGIS Pro as in a disconnected environment. So the long story short is that ArcGIS Pro is Esri's new flagship for desktop GIS. It's the new ArcMap, and ArcMap will eventually go away. It'll continue to be supported for a while yet, but it will eventually go away. ArcGIS Pro is the future. It can live on your desktop with ArcMap, so you can have both installed on your computer. And that's really our recommendation from an Esri perspective is get ArcGIS Pro installed, get the Crime Analysis Solution add-in installed, and start to play around with it. What I hear from many analysts is that they start playing around and it doesn't take them very long between having access to the Crime Analysis Solution and the look and feel of ArcGIS Pro, which is essentially the same as many of the modern Windows Office products, that they get up to speed pretty fast. So if you're still on ArcMap, you're not on ArcGIS Pro yet, but you've got that licensing to take advantage of, today's the day to start moving forward with ArcGIS Pro. And what we're here to talk about today is specifically the brand new tools in the new release that just got released this June of the Crime Analysis Solution around cell phone analysis. Some of you may recall, if you've used some of our previous solutions, that we did have a series of a solution around cell phone analysis for ArcMap. We had a lot of customer user feedback on how that could be improved. And in working on these brand new tools, we decided to take that feedback, start entirely from scratch, and rebuild the tools from ground up. And hopefully you'll find that they'll be of some value to you. And one thing I also want to mention before I kind of get into the tools themselves is that these tools are not intended to compete or supplant existing cell phone analysis software packages that you may already be using. There's a number of great cell phone analysis packages already out there on the market that are very easy to use, that are very robust and oriented to support a variety of workflows around cell phone analysis. And they're great, and many of them already play well, nice in the sandbox with ArcGIS Pro or ArcMap because you can export data out of them as shapefiles. So this is not by any means meant to compete with those particular products. What we were trying to do with this particular set of tools is to enable those of you who don't have access to those kinds of capabilities, who use desktop GIS as part of your daily work, and you occasionally have a need to pull in some kind of cell phone or other electronic device data, and you need to be able to visualize that and occasionally perform some analysis on it to support an investigation, that you've got an out-of-the-box set of free tools that are available to you with your existing desktop GIS licensing. So that's really what we were trying to accomplish, and I hope you'll find that they're a valuable addition to your set of tools through the Crime Analysis Solution that can also be complementary to any bespoke cell phone analysis software that you may already be using. So for those of you who maybe have limited familiarity with cell phone analysis and what we're talking about, I just wanted to do a kind of brief primer. When we say cell phone analysis, what do we actually mean? Well, we mean that this is data that's going to come in the course of an investigation where an investigator has subpoenaed a cell phone carrier, i.e. Verizon or Sprint, AT&T, on a particular target's phone, a target of the investigation. Why? Because they want to gather some kind of evidence about that suspect. They're trying to prove that that particular person either made a call to a particular person at a certain time, or that in the geographic sense, that individual may have been in a certain place at a certain time, as evidenced by their call records. And so how can we identify that? Well, the target of that investigation, when they're making a call, that cell phone is searching for a nearby cell tower in order to be able to relay the cell signal for that phone call. And in that way, by being able to understand where that call, what cell tower that call was received on, not only tower, but the individual sector on this tower, because towers have multiple sectors, we can approximate where that phone may have been at the time of the call, which has evidentiary value in the investigation. Well, when that happens, what does that data look like? Generally, it's going to look like a couple of spreadsheets, not always two, sometimes one, but generally you're going to get two spreadsheets back from the cell phone provider, and that's going to have first information in one spreadsheet about the cell towers where calls were received during whatever the amount of time was that was subpoenaed by the investigator. And then the second spreadsheet is going to be all of the actual calls themselves. So why do you get two spreadsheets? Well, you get two spreadsheets because the call data just indicates the tower and the sector that the call was received on. But cell tower and cell sector by themselves are not geographic components. In order to be able to map those cell towers and cell sectors, we need to understand something about the actual physical position of the cell tower and the sector. And that's what the second spreadsheet, that cell tower location spreadsheet, is really intended to do. So in order to get the call detail records on the map, we first have to get the cell tower and sectors on the map, and then we can associate the call detail records to the cell tower. And I know my explanation may sound, for many of you who are seasoned experts at cell phone analysis, a little simplistic. I'm trying to provide a high-level overview, and in many cases, things end up being quite a bit more complicated. And I appreciate and respect the work that you do in this area, because cell phone analysis is a very challenging and demanding set of tradecraft in our crime and intelligence analysis world. So if step one of cell phone analysis, at least when it comes to a geographic standpoint, is to be able to render on a map the location of the cell tower and an approximate area in which the sector is emitting signal, how do we do that? Well, generally we're looking for about 5 main fields in any data set. First, to identify the tower location. The carrier is going to provide you latitude and longitude. That's going to enable you to put a point on the map that reflects the location of the tower itself. And then each tower is going to have multiple sectors. The cell sector is the thing that's going to be emitting the cellular signal that your cell phone picks up and attaches to when it's making its call. And those cell sectors are roughly generally defined by a couple of things. First, on the tower, the azimuth, which is the bearing from north that the sector is situated on, and then from there, the beam width of the sector signal. That's basically the angle of the arc, and then how far what is the extent of the signal, typically expressed by some kind of radius. Now, that's what you would get in a perfect world, and in most cases you don't get it because it's not a perfect world. So you may find that you don't necessarily have all 3 of those things. But to create a generalized approximation of the sector, that's what we're doing here with these tools. That's what you need to create this kind of sector polygon. And it should be really importantly noted and caveated that these are approximations. They don't reflect the true extent of the cell signal propagation. And that's because there's a lot of factors that are at play. Some of the sectors can reach backwards a little bit. They're impacted by seasonality and by the buildings that are in front of them. these representations are general approximations. They do not represent the true extent of any particular cell sector, and that's important as you're trying to communicate this information not only to investigators, but also to juries or other people who are using this information for evidentiary purposes. So azimuth, beam width, and radius as we look at the sort of rendering of these things. And from here, you know, once we've got two layers, we've got a layer of sectors and a layer of towers, then from there, we can take the call detail records and we can associate them to those two layers. So what do call detail records look like? Well, they look something like what you're seeing on the slide, and that's going to be, we got the date and the time of the call, the direction of the call, how long it lasted. You've got the subscriber ID, so that's the person person that you've subpoenaed, their phone number, and then who they called, and whether the call was answered or not. And then we often have a number of ID fields that represent components of the location and the cell tower and sector where that call was received. In this example, we have beginning switch, beginning site, and beginning sector. These represent kind of components of the individual combination of site and sector where a call was received. So the site is the unique ID of each individual site. The sector is the sector number on that site. So a site number can have multiple sectors, and there can be multiple sites within a switch area. And you also have at the bottom, at the end here, the end switch, end site, and end sector, because as you move around when you're making a call, the cell towers are switching off which cell tower is handling that call. And so you'll often get, as part of your work, where that call was picked up and then where that call was terminated, the cell sector and tower where that occurred. From there, we're able to use that information, the combination of the site ID and the sector ID, and depending upon the carrier, these fields are going to be a little different, but we can use those to then associate those values to your cell tower and sector layers in order to plot them on a map. Once we have the call detail records on a map, now we have all sorts of different kinds of analyses that we can do in order to support investigations and ask questions that have investigative relevance to being able to generate the proof that you're looking for to support your investigation. So, in terms of the actual capabilities that are in this tool set to support that work, we've got a number of different things. First and foremost, the new tools that are available in the Crime Analysis Solution are going to help you import your cell sites and sectors, as well as your CDR data. So there's two tools that'll support that. One tool to bring in your cell sites and sectors, that's called Import Cell Sites, and then a second to import and associate your cell phone records to those cell sites and sectors. From there, you have the ability to visualize call detail record sequences of a single phone. You can do that using the incident sequence tool that was already in the Crime Analysis Solution. So that's not a new tool. It's just applying cell phone data to an existing tool that was already in the Crime Analysis Solution. So you can do that in 2D, or using a new tool that we've created called Features to 3D by Time, that's in the data management section under the enhanced attributes category. You can take any two-dimensional data that has a time value and you can extrude it as a height as a Z value into 3D space. And so in that way, you can also create call detail record sequences in 3D using this new tool, and I'll show you how to do that. That helps with the visualization of time. We've also built in a couple of new custom tools. First is called Repeat Call Patterns. That's going to let you understand repeated patterns of calls between two phones over time. We also have a new tool called SpaceTime Comparison. This is going to enable you to understand if two phones were ever in roughly the same place at the same time as one another. And we've got some simple tools, one to help you generate sector lines. So if you don't like the closed polygons as a way to represent the radial extent of the cell site, which is an issue in court for some jurisdictions, then this tool and give you just open lines representing each sector without the closed arc of the radial end of the polygon. and the dissolve tool, which enables you to do counts of calls by sector. The one area we were not able to support, but I know is an area of interest for a lot of analysts at the first release, is workflows around tower dumps. So that's something that we're hoping to include at a future release, as well as to be able to continue to refine the tools to support all sorts of different workflows around pen registers that you might have for various types of electronic media. So those will be kind of areas for future development. Right now, at the first release, we were really focused on a core set of tools specifically for analysis of cell phone data. So just walking through some of the actual kind of analytical capabilities of these tools. The first one, as I mentioned, is the 2D call detail record sequencing. So the use case here is you've got a call detail record from a phone and you want to understand that user's pattern of life. So you want to understand, okay, they made these 15 calls in order in which they made the calls. How did they move? Maybe that has some kind of relevance to your investigation, that they moved from place A to place B and they did it in a certain path and direction. So in order to run a tool like that using the cell phone analysis tools, first you bring in and render your cell towers and sites using the cell towers and sectors using your import cell sites tool. Then you associate the CDR data to those layers using the import cell phone records tool. And then you simply can run the incident sequence tool on your cell towers in order to generate an output like you see here, where you've got numbered points that are representing the calls in order in which they occurred in this CDR. If you want to get fancy, you certainly can, and you can do that using 3D. This is essentially the same output as the 2D call sequencing analysis. The difference here is that you're able to take advantage of 3D to understand time as a height value. And this starts to become important because it helps you to visualize where in the call detail record there were long gaps of time where there wasn't a call or short bursts of activity, things of that nature that might be relevant to the investigation that you're supporting. And so the way that this tool works is you're going to create, instead of a new map in ArcGIS Pro, you're going to create a new scene, a local scene. And then you're going to do the same thing as before. You're going to run your cell sites tool and import your cell phone records tool. And that's going to give you two-dimensional layers, one of your cell towers and one of your cell sectors. Then on each of those, you're going to run the features to 3D tool. And that's going to give you a 3D version of both of those layers. So a 3D cell sites layer and a 3D cell sectors layer. And so now they're going to float at a height that's equivalent to the amount of elapsed seconds that have occurred since the very first call in that call detail record sequence. And from there, you can just run the incident sequence tool, and you can run it against that 3D sites layer, and it's going to create this 3D line automatically because it knows that your input data is 3D. And so this is going to now be available for you to work with. You can add in some labels, as I've done here, apply some symbology, and you're good. Now, one thing to note with this particular tool set is, as I've been working on this, I've noticed in ArcGIS Pro that sometimes your 3D output, after you run the 3D features by time tool, that sometimes that 3D layer won't show up. We found a bug in ArcGIS Pro that the core team is currently working on, but basically all you have to do is take that layer, move it back down to the 2D grouping in your scene, bring it back up to the 3D. Maybe you might have to do that a couple of times, but then it eventually shows up and it'll show up as a 3D layer on your map. So if you do run into a problem where you've run these tools and the new 3D layer is grayed out, just kind of move it back and forth between the 2D and the 3D area, and you'll be all set, and that'll show up for you. Okay, so the next tool that we've got available for you is the repeat cell phone analysis, repeat call pattern analysis tool. And the use case here is you have CDRs from two different phones, and you'd like to know where each of those phones are when they're calling each other and what the most frequent locations they're at when they're calling each other are. This tool enables you to do that. It creates an output that looks like this, where it'll give you a graduated symbology line that shows you it's graduated by the number of calls between those two unique locations. In this case, cell tower to cell tower, between a phone in red versus a phone in blue. And it will also create individual record detail arrows for you. So if you wanted to use a time slider to understand the kind of order in which those calls were occurring between those two phones, you can. So the way that this tool works is basically you bring in the data, run the cell sites tool for phone 1 to get your tower and your sector layer, associate your cell phone data to them, and then do the same thing for phone 2. And then you can run the repeat call pattern tool on those, and it's going to basically, it's going to be asking you for populating the destination and the subscriber ID. A lot of that stuff will be auto-populated for you. I'll show you that in just a minute. And then you'll get 2 output layers. You'll get the summary layer, and that is what you're seeing here, and you'll get individual detail arrows from call to call over the course of those. And if there's additional calls that are in your CDR record where they don't match up to the second CDR that you're reviewing, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to get summary arrows. It'll only be for the two call detail records and the 2 separate phones that you are analyzing. The next analytical tool is called the SpaceTime Comparison Analysis tool. And the easiest way to describe this tool is through an example. And so the example is that, actually, you know what, I'm going to save the example when I actually show you the live version of this. But basically, this tool is going to enable you to ask questions about whether 2 phones were ever in roughly the same place at the same time, or if they were ever in the same place, or if they ever made a call within a certain user-defined amount of time between one another, where those phones were when they made the call. And running this one works the same way. You got to bring in the data, associate this call detail records for 2 different phones. So you've got 2 different layers, or you got 4 layers: phone 1 sites, and phone 1 sectors, phone 2 sites, phone 2 sectors, and then you can run this repeat call patterns tool to evaluate call records in both phones that match a user-defined spatial distance and temporal distance where those calls were made within the certain amount of space and time of one another. I mentioned we also have the account calls by sector tool. That's just simply using the dissolve tool. This is giving you the ability to count up the number of unique calls that occur at a particular site or sector. And then we also have a generate sector lines tool. And so this is taking your existing polygon sectors, and it's enabling you to turn those into these kind of open sector lines for visualization or court presentation purposes. So that's the core set of capabilities that are available to you in the new cell phone analysis tool set. Now let's have a look at what that looks like in reality. So here I am in ArcGIS Pro. As you'll notice on the top of my ribbon, I've got the new Crime Analysis Solution ribbon, and I've got a group called the Cell Phone Analysis. And here I can see all of my new cell phone analysis tools. In here, I also, in this first particular table that I have on here, is a hypothetical and simplified version of a spreadsheet that you might get from a carrier provider that is providing the locations of cell towers for a call detail record that I've subpoenaed. So in this particular table, I have a bunch of fields, pretty easy to see. So I've got the switch location, the site ID and the sector ID, the latitude and longitude of the tower, and then a field called azimuth, beam width, and radius. So looking at these first 3 records, you can see that all 3 records share the same site ID. So this is the same cell tower, but there's 3 different sectors on that tower. You know that it's the same cell tower, not only from the site ID, but because the latitude and longitude are identical, but the azimuth and the beam width and the radius of each of these are going to vary. So knowing that I have this essential data, now I can go into a map and I can open up my Import Cell Sites tool. And as I open up my Import Cell Sites tool, I'm going to have a bunch of different parameters to fill out in this tool set. So one of the things that you often see from a number of cell phone analysis software providers is that they have a drag and drop interface where it just works because they're maintaining configuration files. That's not something what we're doing with this tool set, but you do have the ability to bring in basically any kind of data. You just need to be able to organize it properly using these tools in order to be able to render it. So the first parameter is your cell site table. That's called sites phone 1. Then I'm going to pick the output layer name for my points layer and my sectors layer. Now the next thing that I need to do is identify the combination of fields that make my data unique. And going back to my spreadsheet, each record really is defined as a combination of the site ID, which in this case was 10, and sector ID, which is 1. So if I kind of merge these together, 10.1 now becomes a unique ID for that particular sector on a cell site tower. If I just used sector ID, there's lots of sector IDs that have the value of 1. If I just used site ID, I'm missing the individual values of each of the sectors. So we need to find the combination of fields that make a unique value for each sector on each cell site. In this case, it's site ID plus sector ID. Depending upon your data, it could be slightly different. So it's important to know your data before you start to render it using these kinds of tools. So going back to my tool, I am going to say, all right, here's the different kinds of identifiers that we often see in cell data. I'm going to select site, and then I'm going to select sector, and then I need to do a simple field mapping. I need to say, okay, well, what field in my data is the site identifier? Well, it's site ID. And for sector, it is sector ID. So in this way, I'm creating and I'm mapping a unique identifier based on the data that I'm working with. From here, I need to tell the tool where my longitude and latitude fields are. I need to assign a output coordinate system, and then I need to tell the tool which fields contain my azimuth, beam width, and radial fields. So I can come in here, select azimuth and beam width. I can define it if my data is being represented as a full or half beam width. I can do that. And you'll notice here default start azimuth, default beam width, and default radial length. So if you don't have these fields in your data, you can still create cell sector polygons if you want to. So you can basically put in values here that you'd like. So I could come in and say my default radius length is 1. And if I didn't have a value that I could derive from a field. So in this way, or I could say my default beam width is 180. So this enables me to, create cell sector representations even if I don't have complete information. But in this case, I do, so I can run this data, and when I press run, I'm going to get 2 outputs. I'm going to get a cell sites layer, so it's just the individual points, and I'm going to get the cell sectors. Inside of this data, if we open up an attribute table for the sectors, the output data is identical in both of these layers. So you're getting all of the fields that were in your initial spreadsheet, and then for the beam width, the azimuth, the beam width, and the radius, we're also writing in 3 fields that say source, some azimuth source, beam width source, radius source. So if you chose to manually input the radial source or the beam width source or the azimuth source, instead of using a field, it'll say manual here instead of input. So input is a field input, and here if I manually inputted something, it would say manual. So this is a way for you to track to know how you rendered these particular layers. And as I said, the data that's behind the cell sector and the cell towers are identical. So it enables you to work with both. You may choose you only want to do analysis on the points. You don't want to deal with the sectors. You can just delete this layer and then continue to work. So from there, once I've got 2 layers, I've got my cell sites and my sectors. Now I want to be able to associate some call data to those layers. And here's my call data, just like you saw in my PowerPoint spreadsheet. I've got the date and the time of the call. I've got the duration of the call, subscriber and destination, ID numbers, and then the values that are really important for associating with our layers, the beginning switch, beginning site and sector, and the end switch, site, and sector. So those are the values that I need to associate to my layers in order to join them. So I'm going to do that. I've got this map, and here I got my my input layers. That's my site and sector layers that I just created. Now I can go to my cell phone analysis tools and click on the import cell phone records tool. And here I'm going to bring in my CDR data, CDR phone 1, bring in the input layers that I want to associate my CDR data to. And now I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the original tool, and that is identify the combination of fields that represent a unique ID. And in this case, my field names are exactly the same. Yours might be slightly different from the call detail data to the individual fields themselves. So again, I've got beginning site and beginning sector. And then I go to the subscriber identifier field and I'll select subscriber ID. And then I can also enter in the end site and sector, creating a unique ID for them. And I just see as I'm doing this a little bit, I saw a question from Levi who asks, if you have multiple switches, I don't think the cell site and sector IDs will be enough to make them unique. That may be true. And so you're going to have to identify for the particular data set that you're working with, what the combination of fields are that create a sufficiently unique value for each individual sector and site. So I'm not saying that that's authoritatively the combination that you're going to use. It's actually going to vary from carrier to carrier. So you're going to have to look at it and identify the combination of fields that make a unique identifier for each sector on each site. So that's a really important thing to know. That's a great question, Levi, thank you. And you may find that carrier to carrier, or if you're looking at a broad scope of data that's kind of national, if you're looking at a target that was moving around from state to state to state, that you may run into that kind of problem, and you're going to need to identify that combination of fields that represents a truly unique ID. So just getting back to this tool, we've got our destination phone number, and then we're going to identify the record start date and time field, which in my case is date time. And you may, in some cases, have a duration field, or you may have an end date and time field. In this case, I don't have an end date and time field. What the output of this tool will do is, for whichever combination you have, whether it is a start date and a duration or a start date and an end date, it will automatically populate the one you don't have. So from there, you're going to click on, if you have data that is UTC, so some carriers don't provide you the start date and time in the local time zone. They provide it to you in UTC form. If you want to be able to convert that to local time, because it's easier for you to deal with, there's like a checkbox here that lets you do that. If your provider is also providing you an estimated phone location X and Y, you can enter those here. And then when you run this tool, you're going to get two outputs. You're going to get that cell site and that cell sector output. And if we look at the cell site data, it's going to look as so, which is it has all of the fields basically from both steps. So you're getting not only all of the data from the call detail record, but you're also getting all of the data from the cell sites and sectors. So the idea conceptually with the tools is that we wanted to give you the ability to keep all of the data from those original spreadsheets in your layers in case you needed them for some purpose. So you're persisting in the result of this, all of the data from your call detail record and all of the data from your cell tower spreadsheet. So once you've got that kind of data, so you've rendered your cell sites and sectors, you've associated to those cell sites and sectors your call detail records, and we now got the ability to start performing some analysis. So the first analysis that we want to look at maybe is that 2D sequencing. And to do that, we just use the incident sequence tool. I saw a question from Greg really quickly before I move on to that next tool. It said, the question was, how does the checkbox for convert UTC the local time take into consideration changes in UTC offset due to daylight savings time? Does it look at the date and determine what the offset was at that specific date? It does not. It's not doing historical referencing, Greg. No, it's doing it based on the current UTC, the current local time, and whether you're in daylight savings currently. So you may have to do further adjustment to it, and you could do that using Python if this is historical data and you've got an issue with daylight savings time offset that's different from your current system time. But yes, the checkbox is converting to local time zone based on your current date and time settings of your system. So that is important to know. Great question, Greg. So getting back to the incident sequence tool, the incident sequence tool is really straightforward. It can be run on any point feature. So I've got my CDR data associated to my sites, and I can then have this sequence sorted by any of my valid date fields. One is going to be start time. And then when I run my tool, I'm going to get an output that looks like this, where I've got a point layer, the point layer showing the sequence number of the call detail records, and I've got a sequence line. So if you look at these separately and I turn off the sequence line, you'll notice that this particular line is one single line. It's not individual line segments. In a future release, we're looking to potentially change that, but right now it's one complete line across all of the individual segments. But if you want to take this sequence points data and you want to be able to start working with it as like a time slider, I can right-click on that layer, go to Properties, go to Time, and turn on the start time and the end time as valid time fields. And from there, a time slider is going to pop up, where now I can enable time, and then I could use a time slider to see how this stuff moves over time. So if I wanted to get saucy with this and I needed to produce something for court, I could also go into, I could go into the animation, and I could make an animation based on the individual time steps. I could import my time slider steps, individual time step in this data set. Ultimately enabling that looks like, I thought they had this thing open. Let's see if I do. Nope, I guess I don't have it open. Simple animations, simple videos. So here's an example. Actually, you know what? I'm going to save that since I actually built this with a 3D animation. I'll show that in just a minute when we get to the 3D data. So, so getting back to my ArcGIS Pro project. So that's the 2D sequencing tool in ArcGIS Pro in the Crime Analysis Solution. This particular this particular tool can also be used to create 3D cell phone sequences. So this is what one of these particular kinds of sequences look like. It's no different. You run the same incident sequence tool to accomplish it. The only thing that's different here is when I have 2D layers. So in my table of contents, you can see my 2D layers with my call detail records associated to my phone sites and sectors. I'm going to take those two layers. I'm going to go to Enhance Attributes and Features to 3D by Time. And I'm going to run this tool on both my sectors and my sites. And so to do that, it's simply going to want an input date field. So you're going to pick your start time, and then you run, and it's going to create a 3D version of each of these layers based on a time value. And so what we're looking at in this 3D rendering, the amount of Z value or height between call number 1 and call number 2 is the amount of elapsed seconds between the calls. So 1 second equals 1 foot. You can change this in the tool. You can see in the tool there's extrusion options. Those extrusion options are, you can change the interval. So if you wanted it to be different than 1 second per foot, and it's drawing the foot from the map projection. So if you wanted to use meters instead of feet, you might change the map projection in order to accomplish a different ratio of time to distance. And one other thing that's handy in here that's important to know, you'll note the last parameter in this tool is called base date and time. This is important when you want to show in one single scene multiple layers that begin at different times. So because this tool inherently, to create these height extrusions, uses the very first date and time that it finds in your data set, if you're working with layers that have different start date and times, they're not going to be comparable because they're extruding at different relative temporal ratios. So what you want to do is look at your data, understand what the earliest start date and time is, and then for all of the layers that you're extruding to 3D, extrude based on the earliest date and time value that you find. So in that way, you'll be able to appropriately reference these to one another temporally so that they are comparable in Z value or height space. So that's it with building these 3D sequences. It's really easy. Just use the 3D features to 3D by time tool, and then you can run the incident sequence tool right on those 3D points, and you'll get a 3D line just like you've seen. And again, I can animate these things. So if I want to be able to, show how they move over time, you can do that. You could also get fancier, and you could incorporate movement or zoom tos, and ultimately, if you want to kick these out as some kind of animation, which I've done very quickly here this morning, you could build very simple little animation videos that show how this stuff proceeds over time. And you'll note in this map, I not only have the locations in 3D, so these in height value, but I also have the 2D reference points on the map in 2D on the ground, so you're able to understand where they are in 2D space as well as 3D space. So that is being able to use the tools to create these 3D cell phone sequences. The next tool I want to show you is around repeat call patterns. And so this is a very simplified example. Obviously, your data would have a lot more data in it when you're working with 2 different layers, 2 different phones. But the rough idea for this particular example is I have 2 phones. I've got phone A in black, and I've got phone B in yellow. And I want to understand when these 2 phones were calling each other, where were each of the phones, and were there common locations where they were calling each other from? Maybe phone A is calling from a retail drug market corner, and phone B is calling from a stash house location, and they're working on some kind of re-up, and I want to be able to evaluate that. So the way that this tool works is pretty straightforward. Once you've created your cell site and sector layers and associated your data, from there we can first identify, okay, my phone A sites and my phone B sites. I could run this on the site layer or the sector layer. In this example, I'm going to run it on sites, and then name my output layers, and then what it's looking for is the primary phone, subscriber, and destination and start time, and the secondary phone, subscriber, destination, and start time. But because when you run the import tools that we have, we're standardizing the output field names. So this tool will automatically pick up if your data sets have been run through those import tools, the correct field names for these. So you don't even have to populate really any of these. You just enter your input to phones, sites, or sectors, and where you want to call, where you want to store and call the call lines and the detail lines, and then you run. and you're going to get two outputs. The first output is going to be relatively simple. It's that graduated symbology line, as I mentioned, that also has a count for the number of calls. If I look at the attribute table on this, it's pretty straightforward. It's got a destination XY, an origin XY, and the number of calls that were made between those two. And then in addition, I also have a repeat call detail value as well. So in this case, every single unique call is getting a connecting arrow, and those connecting arrows are going to contain a little bit more information. We're getting all of the call detail record information and each of the location information records for both of those. So you can, again, you could take those call detail layers if you wanted to, render their time, and then work with them in a time slider. And this tool can be run not only against cell sites, but if you wanted to run it specifically against cell sectors, you can see here, well, there were 6 calls between these two towers for these two phones. There was 4 specifically between this sector to this sector. So that enables us to zero in a little bit more where the likely location was for both of those phones when they were making those calls. The next tool I want to share with you is called the SpaceTime Comparison tool. The SpaceTime Comparison tool, as I mentioned, enables you to be able to evaluate whether phones were roughly in the same place at the same time. So the way that this works is I'm going to input my, let's see, the sectors for my phone 1. So that's phone 1 is in black and phone 2 is in yellow. I'm going to input the phone 2 sectors. And then what I want to know in this example is, were there any calls between these, with any calls in both of these phones, not necessarily to each other, where they were within a certain amount of time. And so my example use case here is phone 1 in black. That individual went to a particular location with a firearm. He went to a storage locker. He dropped the firearm off in a storage locker, and he called one of his associates after he made the drop off from the parking lot to let them know that the drop off had been made. Then 30 minutes later, another individual comes to the location, to the storage locker, picks up the firearm, and then calls his own associate. So they never called each other, they never called a common person, but they made phone calls. They call, and that's within 30 minutes to notify their associate that the pickup was made. So we want to be able to hunt in both of these CDRs for any scenario, any calls that were made where they were within a 1,000 foot radius of each other and a 30-minute window. So that's what I can do with this tool. I can say, all right, when I want to search 1,000 feet and I want to search 30 minutes, and then I also have the option to say, all right, well, I'm interested not only in any calls that match both of those space-time parameters, but if they ever made a call where they were within 1,000 foot of one another, regardless of the time, I can do that with I can select that with the checkbox. Additionally, I can also check on if they ever made a call within 30 minutes of each other, regardless of where they were, so independent of space. So when I run this, I'm going to get an output layer for each of my calls. So each phone is going to get a matched layer. And I'm going to get, they're going to be color coded like this. I had 2 matches for these calls, one for space and time and one for space. And you're going to see a match ID value. So if you have multiple space-time matches or multiple space matches, each match in both call records is going to have a unique ID. So that's how you know that these 2 calls are related. And that's what's happening here, that there was a call in both of these CDRs where that call was within 1,000 feet and 30 minutes of the comparison CDR, the yellow phone. So we did find that that 2 calls were made within 1,000 feet and 30 minutes of one another in those 2 locations. And up here, there was a call made in both of the CDRs here, within 1,000 feet of each other, but not within the 30-minute window. So that's what the space only really represents. So it's a pretty cool tool. We put it in the cell phone analysis grouping of tools in the toolbox, but we really see the value of this tool being much larger than just cell phone analysis. There's lots of different applications that you could apply this kind of tool to. So the next tool is really quite simple. It's for creating court visualizations or visualizations when you don't want to have the polygon radius representation of your cell sectors. It's very, very simple tool. It actually runs on your cell points data because your cell points data contains all of the azimuth and beam width and the radius information as part of what gets created. So you input your cell site points and where you want to put your output lines, and then you get an output that looks like this. Very simple, very easy. There's not really much to it. You're getting a line value for each one of those, and those are going to represent all of the same data, basically. And then the last tool is the dissolve tool. And the dissolve tool, again, is really quite simple. This is the out-of-the-box dissolve tool in ArcGIS Pro. There's nothing new here. The dissolve tool is simply input features, identify the features that you want to dissolve, and then you're going to get a graduated color symbology based on the number of calls occurring at that particular sector. So again, very straightforward. So regardless of the kind of analysis that you want to do, you can make a variety of products. I showed you the animation videos that you could create. You can also create hard copy layouts. Here I've got a layout that I've done where I've created sort of the list of all of the call detail records. I've created the map showing the entire sequence, and then a zoomed in map showing a suspect residence within a cell tower area. But you can also take any of this data, so maybe your 2D cell phone sequence data, and you can share that as a web map or as a web layer into your ArcGIS Online organizational portal. So that can be an ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. And that's enabling you to do things like make story maps. So this is an example of a new story map. This is the new cell phone, the new ArcGIS Story Maps template that just came out in June. And this is essentially an interactive version of a standard briefing that we might make. In this example, I'm able to work with the map. I'm able to have it pop out. I can zoom in to particular areas on the map if I want. I can select individual items in the map. And in this particular story, now I'm contextualizing the cell phone analysis with the larger investigative story. And that larger investigative story is that this cell phone analysis was in support of a series of burglaries that occurred, working between two very suspicious individuals there, where they were hitting particular locations for certain kinds of goods that were being requested by a pawn shop owner. So I'm able to use this, walk through each of the individual cases, what was taken, and tell that story in a richer, more interactive way than a standard PDF bulletin is going to allow. I can, even if there was video that was relevant, I can bring that into my, my story map as well. And so this becomes generally, not just for cell phone analysis, but generally a new way to deliver a richer experience to your analytical customers, whether that's investigators, whether that's juries or prosecutors, or whether that's even when you're telling the good work of an investigation out to the public. Story maps are a great way to transform and make your analytical work products more interactive. So that is a kind of high-level view of where we're at currently with our new crime analysis tools. How do you get started? And we've had a number of questions come in regarding getting started with this. Well, first and foremost, getting and deploying the crime analysis solution. To get it, you will find it on our solutions page. So our solutions page is at solutions.arcgis.com. If you scroll down, you'll find the law enforcement section under the local government section. So if you scroll down to ArcGIS Solutions for Local Government, you'll see this featured content carousel. You click it once and you press Law Enforcement. And from there, you'll be able to click on Learn More under the Perform Crime Analysis heading. And this is where you'll be able to find the Crime Analysis Toolbar. There's two ways. If you go to the Get Started button, there's two ways to get it. We either have an add-in for ArcGIS Pro called the Solutions Deployment Tool, and that'll let you deploy any of the Esri solutions that we have into your ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise organization. So that's one way that you can get the crime analysis solution. It's also a great way to deploy other of our solutions into your ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise organization. That's great if you have one of those. If you don't, the easiest way to do it is come to this manual section, click Download and Install Crime Analysis Add-in, and then click this download link. And inside that download link, what you're going to get is it's going to be ask you to create an account. If you don't have an account already, you can create a public one so that you can sign in and get access to this. And what you're going to get out of it is something that looks like, let me just show you the example. You're going to get a folder that's a zipped folder, and when you unzip it, it's going to have four things in it. It's going to have the help documentation, and it's going to have the add-in file to add in the ArcGIS crime analysis solution. When you add it in, the important thing to know is that you need to delete it, or excuse me, that you need to have ArcGIS Pro closed in order to turn this on. So have ArcGIS Pro closed, double click it. It's going to ask you to install add-in, press the install add-in button, and then you'll have the crime analysis solution add-in. It also includes a packaged ArcGIS Pro project. So this is literally everything that I just showed you, all examples with the input data, what it should look like as an output. So you have everything that you need to be able to play around with these tools to understand them before you start applying them to your data. Another question that I've seen come up on the webinar is, well, I don't see this cell phone tool, but I already have the crime analysis solution. What's up with that? Or do I have to uninstall my current toolbar to get this new add-on? And the answer is yes. If you currently have the crime analysis solution, you need to delete your old add-in and go get the new one and install the new one. So delete your old one, go get the new one and install it. I'm sorry, that's the kind of way it works right now. We're working on making that a more seamless experience for the future so that you'll get notified and it'll just automatically update for you. But for right now, that's the way that it works. So then the next question is, okay, well, how do I actually delete one of these toolbars? Well, you go into the backstage, which is the project tab on your ribbon bar. That's the first one. And then you come down to Add-in Manager. And then you'll see the crime analysis solution. It's right there. And you go to the bottom right-hand corner and delete this add-in, and then close ArcGIS Pro, and then go get the new one and reinstall it. So that's the way that getting this new version of the crime analysis solution works right now. Hopefully in the future, we'll be able to improve that for you so that it's more of an automated experience. I'm sure, well, hopefully, this webinar has created more questions for you. I've got some additional resources for you to be able to kind of get yourself up to speed. If you copy down this link, go.esri.com/cdr-webinar, you will find a Microsoft OneDrive folder, and that OneDrive folder is going to contain a whole bunch of stuff. First, the PowerPoint of this presentation. So if you wanted to go through all of this kind of information, you can. Secondly, it's got the help documentation for the crime analysis solution as well as the download links, so you know where to go to get that. Additionally, I was meant to cover it, but we're running a little bit late. The crime analysis solution is available as part of a larger free solution that's called ArcGIS Pro for Intelligence. ArcGIS Pro for Intelligence is interesting for crime analysts because it also includes some free tools to support timelining as well as link charting. We'll be covering that in an upcoming webinar. I didn't get a chance to get to it today, but if you are interested in looking at what's available with ArcGIS Pro for Intelligence, and again, this is free, it doesn't cost any additional money, it just sits on top of ArcGIS Pro. The download links in the help doc for that is there. We also have a 6-course web course training series for the crime analysis solution designed by Stacy Belladin, who's a former crime analyst like myself. That covers all of the main tooling on the crime analysis solution ribbon. It does not yet include a dedicated course for cell phone analysis. We're currently working on that and should hopefully have that released by the end of the year. And then if you haven't had a chance to play with the crime analysis solution, you haven't seen some of the other functionality, I also added into this, this link in this folder, a link to a story map that I put together that shows you some of the functionality that's available in the crime analysis solution, some of what the tools do. So it's a very easy way to be able to understand what you get with the crime analysis solution. Or if you're having issues around getting ArcGIS Pro or being able to make a pitch in your organization to get it, this is something that you can show to a decision maker to help them understand the kinds of capabilities that you're going to get with getting ArcGIS Pro and getting the crime analysis solution. This is part of a larger webinar series. So we do the law enforcement webinars every other month, but there's all sorts of different public safety webinars happening every single month that are relevant potentially to the work that you do. The next couple that are coming up, one in particular you may find helpful. On 8/21, we're going to be having a webinar that's going to be talking about GIS applications in the fire service for planning, accreditation, and response. And then on the 12th of September, we're going to be doing a webinar that looks at the ArcGIS Pro for Intelligence solution and how some of those tools that I mentioned a minute ago, some timelines, some link charting capabilities, can be used in support of intelligence operations and analysis. And that's true across a wide array of intelligence disciplines, whether it's national intelligence, defense and military intelligence, or in our case, criminal intelligence. And this is also the place to go for finding our recordings of the webinar. So if you've been following along today and you're going, okay, well, this stuff is really cool, but I need to see this again, in a couple of days, we'll have the recording of this webinar up on our public safety webinar series site, and you can find all of them there. You also can find them if you go to YouTube and you just search for Esri Law Enforcement webinar on YouTube. You'll find them there as well. So I've got time for just a couple of questions. Let me run through the box really quick. If you're interested in learning more generally about the kinds of capabilities that Esri can deliver to law enforcement agencies, scan this QR code. We have a free ebook that's accessible for you that can help you either understand more about how Esri software is applied in law enforcement agencies, or how, if you need to be able to kind of make a pitch to a decision maker for the technology that you need as an analyst, this is a great way to be able to give them something that helps them understand how this technology relates to the work that you do. So Jill Hatton has a question. She installed the toolbar. When she tries to use the cell phone analysis tools, she had an issue with it. Jill, send me an email afterwards and we'll follow up and we'll get that problem resolved. I think there might have been an issue with reinstalling the tool. Another question from Ashish Dawan, can we connect CDR data with cell tower and track mob moving from one locality to another? What would be the limitation of CDR records per second? Well, I think, Ashish, the question that you're getting at is around live tracking. These tools really aren't optimized for live tracking of that kind of data necessarily, but And since they are geoprocessing tools, they can be exposed as geoprocessing services to ArcGIS Enterprise. If you did have the need to be kind of running and calling data on a recurring basis, where you were expecting to find call data in the exact same format, you were dumping it to a network drive and you needed to take that data and kind of recurring reorient that data. How would the cell phone import tool handle data which is in 2 different time zones? From Michael Rainey, that's the question. Some data is in local time and the other is in CST. Michael, that's a great question. Unfortunately, that was an issue that came up sort of fairly late in our beta testing phase. It's an area that we'd like to improve the tools on in the future. We don't have an answer for this right now, other than as you're doing the analysis, you really ought to be taking the cell phone data records and splitting them into 2 records where you have the flip over from the 2 different time zones and then managing them separately. We'll hope to improve that in the future, though. Thank you for that question. Taylor Hale asks, I believe I currently have ArcGIS 10.3.1. What is the difference between that and ArcGIS Pro? Taylor, that's ArcGIS, that's ArcMap 10.3.1. So that's the old version of our desktop software, and ArcGIS Pro is the new version of our software. Feel free to give me an email. But really the thing that you're going to need to do is touch base with the administrator of your Esri licenses in your organization, validate that you are on maintenance with your licensing, and have them get into their account to be able to download ArcGIS Pro for you and get you a license for ArcGIS Pro and get that installed on your computer. Will there be any kind, Robin Schmitz asks, will there be any kind of guide produced to help understand importing different carrier information? Not at this point, so we're not planning to support, it's just sort of beyond our bandwidth to be able to support recommendations for that, but we would be very glad and willing to support any users that are interested in being able to provide that kind of information. You know, if you're interested in writing a blog with us or something along those lines. I mean, our attitude generally with the tool is that we tried to build it in such a way that you can use it with any kind of carrier. We're just not in the position to be able to support the different schemas and the changing schemas and the frequency of the changing schemas that exists between the different carriers. But if it's something that you'd be interested in working on with us, you know, we'd be interested in doing whatever we can to support the needs of the crime and intel analyst community in understanding that kind of information. And then just lastly, Sunshine McDonald asked, this is not related to cell phones, so this could be addressed offline. Do you know if more enhancements are coming to the link chart? So Sunshine, I would say the best thing to do is to tune in for the September webinar so that you're able to see kind of what the current set of capabilities are around the link chart in ArcGIS Pro for Intelligence and what the current roadmap is. Well, thanks again, everyone, for your time today. Again, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact me at cdelaney@esri.com, and I'm glad to help you get started with the Crime Analysis Solution or ArcGIS Pro or any other additional questions you might have around law enforcement and Esri technology. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and hopefully we'll see you again for the next webinar in September with the ArcGIS Pro for Intelligence solution. Again, thanks everyone, and I hope you have a great day.